our session. Today we have a most welcome guest, Ana Díaz-Negrillo from the University of Granada in Spain. I'm very sorry that you can't see her on our session, but there were some troubles with the combination of the video and microphone, so we just made a choice that we would like to hear her delivering the talk, and that we unfortunately have to see her maybe at the end of the talk, just to see you. That would be very nice. So anyway, I hope that the microphones are okay. Mine is somewhat, I don't know.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly well. So welcome, and the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor for me to be here today. I'm so grateful to the Institute of Formal and Applied Linguistics at Czech University, and in special, I'm very thankful, very grateful to Magda Čertíková for inviting me to give this talk today. Well, as you can see from the title of this presentation, I'm going to talk about two things which are closely related. First of all, I'd like to talk about an L2 corpus called COREFL that we are collecting at the University of Granada. So I'll say a little bit about the corpus, the design, the type of data that we are collecting in this corpus, and then I'll present some results of a corpus-based study, a study based on the COREFL corpus on referring expression selection. During the description of the corpus, I will give a very brief introduction to learner corpora. So I'll talk about the main features of this type of language corpus. I'll talk about the corpus family, where this corpus belongs. And then I'll talk about the corpus design. I'll talk about the main properties of this corpus. Then I'll refer very, very briefly to the data holdings that we have so far and which are online. And then I'll talk about the different tasks that we have used for the collection of the data. Then I refer to the data collection, the different procedures, how we collect the data, how we store the data, and the different procedures, as I say, that we use before the data is online. And then I'll talk about the corpus interface. The data is freely available online, so I'd like you to show you how the interface works, so just a little bit, so that you're familiar with it, and of course, hoping that if you find it relevant to your research, you can use the data. Now, first of all, COREFL is a corpus of L2 English. It's also known as an English learner corpus. So what is this? What about this type of corpus? As any other L2 corpus, COREFL consists of texts which are produced by language learners, and this is what makes a learner corpus specific. In this particular case, the language they use is English, L2 English. A learner corpus works similarly to a native corpus in terms of tools and the type of methodology that is used. It is largely based on frequencies, based on collocations, co-occurrence of language forms, etc. Though, of course, because of the particular nature of this type of corpus, there are certain differences that apply, and so the type of tools, sometimes the methodologies have to be adapted. In terms of corpus design, something that is very specific to L2 corpora, that learner-related variables, as you can imagine, are crucial. So information like the learner's L1, their age, their proficiency level, you're studying at the foreign language, is going to determine the type of language that is produced and that is later on stored in the corpus. So all these features have to be highly controlled during data compilation, and of course they have to be documented in detail when the corpus is made available. Another property that is specific to this type of language corpus, of language corpora, is the tools. So automatic software does not perform so successfully as on native data, on native corpora, and this is especially so on beginners' texts. And also in terms of methodologies, you can imagine that the users that are interested in this type of corpora are those that are interested in foreign language. So and the specific methodologies that are used are often related to the analysis of errors, L2 errors. So tagging learner errors in this type of corpora is a very common practice. And there's also another type of methodology that is largely used on learner corpora, and data is that of comparison. So different types of learner data are compared. So for example, L1 Spanish, L2 English against L1 German, L2 English, so that different L1 backgrounds are different, but the same target language are used, so that to see the kind of differences that exist across different populations. And there's also the possibility, there's often the case that the learner data is contrasted against the native data, the target language data. Now, the disciplines that are directly related to L2 corpora are those, of course, that have something to do with foreign languages. And there are two major disciplines associated to learner corpora. These are language teaching and second language acquisition. Of course, there are other disciplines that, that use learner data and work with this type of data. For example, computer sciences, computational linguistics, language teaching, even teacher training is also another discipline that is closely related to it. But the two major ones are language teaching and second language acquisition. I work with a team of second language acquisition researchers. My background is not second language acquisition. I have to say that I have a background on English linguistics, but since recently I've been getting involved in second language acquisition a bit more, since I take part of this research team, and I work with them in different projects. So the approach we take in learner corpora is from a second language acquisition perspective. And I'm going to say a little bit more about the COREFL corpus in particular. Now, as you can see, there are three different corpora in the screen: COREFL2 corpus, the COREFL corpus, and the FJelinekSeries core corpus. Now, the COREFL corpus is one of the three corpora that are being collected from Granada. And this is being done from our research team. The first learner corpus that started to be collected was the COREFL2 corpus. This started years ago, and it's a corpus of L2 Spanish. This started at the beginning of the 2003 or 2005, something like that. And the main coordinator, Cristobal Lozano, I'll refer to him a little bit later on, started to collect this corpus. He started off with just one component, L1 English, L2 Spanish, that is learners of English which had L1 English as the mother tongue, were represented in this corpus. And from then on, he started to incorporate other L2 components. So far, as you can see, there's a long list of L2 components that are represented in the corpus. Then a few years ago, we thought that, well, it would be a good idea to collect a corpus of L2 English based on the same variables, on the same design variables that were at work in the COREFL2 corpus. And then we started to collect data for the COREFL corpus, now an L2 corpus of English. We started collecting data from our students, university students. So the first component, again, that was collected was L1 Spanish, L2 English. And we also started collaboration with Marcus Callis from the University of Bremen, and he started collecting data from his university students, and he's now in charge of the L1 German, L2 English component. Now, I have to say that one of the components is L1 Czech, L2 English. Professor Graf is in charge of this component, and I have to say that he, in collaboration with Lucy Diankova from the English department, are doing a great job. They are collecting a lot of data, and in a very short period of time. Lucy is very excited. He's doing a great job, and we're also very excited that the Czech component is doing so great. We also have data from French learners of English, Turkish learners of English. More recently, we are incorporating also another component representing Greek learners of English. And in the near future, after the summer, we're hoping to open up a new L2 component in COREFL, the one representing Italian learners of English. So as you can see, these are corpora that are growing every day. And the idea is to incorporate as many more L2 components as possible, and also to have different types of languages represented in the corpora. Now, the third corpus is a JEFL corpus, which is a corpus of L2 Japanese. And you may wonder why Japanese. Well, there is a member of a team which uses Japanese as a foreign language at our university, and we thought that it would be a very good idea to have an L2 Japanese corpus, which will represent exactly the same variables that are present in the L2 corpus and the COREFL corpus, and also have another type of language represented in our corpus family. So far, there is just one L2 component, one Spanish, L2 Japanese, and the students of these professor are participating in this corpus, in this component. Now, something else that is interesting about the corpus, I'll refer to it later on, is that there are also native components were shared across the three corpora. The native components that are represented in this corpus family so far are Spanish, English, and Japanese. So for the three represented the target languages for the three learner corpora, and we also have more native material, in particular L1 German, L1 Portuguese, Greek, Arabic, Czech, and Turkish. Now, as I was saying, our objective is to have all the L2 components that are represented in the corpus also represented in their by their native tongue. Now, just to give you some very general information about the corpus and the corpus family, in particular, the main coordinator is Cristóbal Lozano from the University of Granada. He's also the main coordinator of a project. Ignacio Lopez Saco is in charge of the L2 Japanese corpus, and I'm in charge of the COREFL corpus along with Cristóbal Lozano. The corpus were collected at the beginning of, started to be collected at the beginning of a project, which is now over. The project was called ANACOR, and now we're collecting data with the funding we obtained in a second research project, ANACOR-X, which is started last year. Now, you may wonder, what about these names, ANACOR and ANACOR-X? Why is it repeating? Well, they both have these names, ANACOR, ANACOR-X, because we do research into anaphora resolution, anaphoric reference. And so along with the collection of the learner corpora, we do research using the data we collected to investigate how anaphora resolution is acquired by language learners. In the first project, we only looked at corpus data, and in the second project, we're looking at corpus data and also experimental data. That's what X is part of the name in the second project. Now, I'm going to say a little bit, a few things about the corpus design. Now, the novelty of these three L2 corpora relies on a number of features. The first feature, which I would say is the most important feature, is that the same design applies to all the components, L2 components and native components. And why so? Because we want to make them fully available across all the independent components. We want to make them fully comparable across the three corpora. And this is so that we can carry out this systematic analysis of the same linguistic phenomenon in different L2s, the 3 L2s that are represented, and we can compare that against the native language and also against the learner's mother tongue. And having typologically different L2s representing in the corpora, that will be very interesting as well. Now, another novelty of the corpus family is that we have native cultural components, and again, in terms of the learner's mother tongue, as you can see in the example here. So for the L1 Spanish, L2 English component, the learner's mother tongue is represented in one of the native components, and the target language of this is also represented in the corpus. And why so? Because we want to look at factors like possible transfer from the learner's mother tongue into their foreign language, and of course because we want to ultimately look at language acquisition. So the target language, the representation of the target language is important, and since the native components have exact same design, these comparisons are possible, as I mentioned before. Now, another novelty of the corpora is that the L2 components represent a variety of proficiency levels. So we are representing beginner levels up to advanced levels, so from A1 to C2. And we want to have all the levels represented so that we can have a wide picture of the of language development. We use proficiency test, placement test when we collect the data for the 3 corpora. Another novelty is that we use a variety of narrative tasks when we collect the data. And we do so that we can replicate our results. So the results obtained in one particular task can be replicated by analyzing data produced on a different task. And then we can see if there are any task effects in our results. We have 2 different types of narrative tasks. Some of them are more open-ended, so less control is exerted of the task. And we also have story retell tasks, which are a little bit more controlled. Now, another novelty of the corpora is that even though we started collecting only written data, we thought it would be a very good idea to collect oral data. So we started collecting oral data. And this way we can also look at the effect of mode on language performance and development. And this is what I'm going to talk about in this study I'll present later on. So this allows us to compare, for example, written and spoken L2 English against written and spoken L1 English. And we also have that for the learner's mother tongue. So we can compare written data against written data across the 3 components, or spoken data and written data within the same language components. More generally, the data is collected online. We collect oral data on site, and this is the way we started collecting oral data, but not with COVID. We thought that it may be a good idea to collect data online, or spoken data online. So we're using Google Meet and Zoom to collect oral data as well. And collecting data online means that we can collect largest amounts of data, and also that there may be a wider range of learners and institutions represented in the data. At the end of the first research project, the data we collected was put online. The second version of COREFL and the first version of COREFL are already online. They are freely available. They can be used using the interface, and they can be fully downloaded and freely downloaded from our interface. I'll show you the interface in a moment. Now, what about the data holdings? I'm only referring to the data that is online, that is available. The rest of the data is being processed at the moment. So as you can see, for COREFL, we have over 1 million words. COREFL2 is of course larger than COREFL because it started to be collected much earlier than COREFL. And we've got, plenty of data from learners of English, different L1s, and we also have plenty of data in the native components. COREFL is half the size of Spanish-L2, so all in all, they are over 500,000 words. Again, we have plenty of learned data and enough native data to represent this group in our studies. So all in all, the data that is online is over 1.5 million words. Now, what about the task? I referred to the task briefly before. I said that we have a variety of narrative tasks, and you may wonder why narrative tasks. Well, these are the tasks that, or the genre, the narratives is a genre that better reflects the linguistic phenomenon that we're interested in. That is the selection of referring expressions in anaphoric contexts. So we use in narrative tasks, but we also want to have a variety of tasks represented in our data, as I explained before. We have more open-ended narratives. All in all, we have 4 different tasks. We're using 4 different tasks. Within open-ended narratives, we have 2 different tasks. One of them, we ask the participant to talk about a famous person of their choice, and another one, we ask them to summarize a film they've seen recently. Now, you may wonder why these 2 tasks. Are they? Well, because they actually look very similar. Well, they are similar, but they are different in that in the first task, when we ask them to talk about a famous person, then there will be plenty of context where there will be maintenance of the reference to the same participant. So, you know, there will be usually just one character in the narrative. Whereas in the second open-ended narrative, where they have to summarize a film, we expect them to use a variety of characters to refer to a variety of characters. So there will be points where they will be maintaining the reference to the same character, but there will be others where there will be reference shifts when they switch to another character. Now, the other type of narrative tasks are those which are less open-ended. So here there's a little bit more control. We'll have, again, 2 different tasks. One of them is based on the story Frog, Where Are You? And it's a picture story retell. Here are a number of vignettes. So we present the participants with a number of vignettes, a number of pictures where a story is represented. This is a story of a boy who's found a frog, and he puts it into a jar, and then the frog, as you can see in the second vignette, escapes overnight, and then when he wakes up in the morning, the frog is no longer there, and then he sets out to look for the frog. So there's only one character again, and it's the story of this boy trying to find his frog. So it's a picture retell based on vignettes. And then the second task is based on a video clip from the movie The Kid by Charles Chaplin. It only lasts 4 minutes, and what we can see here is the story of a very few scenes of the film where Charles Chaplin comes across a baby, and he tries to, in a way, get rid of a baby, find a solution for this baby. Well, not just one. He tries different things, but in the end, he says that there's no point, and he decides to keep the baby. So as you can see here, unlike in the previous task, we have different characters. It's also interesting that there are different sexes represented in the characters. So, you know, we pick the task very carefully so that we know that there are plenty of opportunities to get the data that we're interested in for the analysis of an alpha resolution. Most of the data we've collected so far has been produced on the Chaplin film, The Kid, and also The Frog. And now we are more recently, we are collecting data on the other 2 tasks. So at the end of the project, we would like to have a wider representation of the more open-ended tasks, famous person and the film. Now, how do we collect the data? We collect the data using Google Forms, which are online, and we collect the data in 2 different steps. Once the Google form is ready and is online, we ask the participant to fill in the form, and in the Google form there will be 3 different sections. In the first section, we collect data from the participant's profile. As I say, this type of information, learner-related data, is crucial in learner corpora. So we ask the participant to give information about themselves, so the sex, age, institution, degree program, of course the L1, the mother and father's L1s, the language they speak at home, what age they started learning English, whether they've visited in any English-speaking countries and spent some time abroad, whether they have any language certificates. Now, the proficiency level is a very important aspect, is a very important piece of information. So we try to collect as much information in relation to the learners' proficiency level. So we ask them whether they have any certificate, any language certificate, when they obtain them. We also ask them to assess the proficiency level in the 4 different communicative skills: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. We also ask them whether they speak other foreign languages, etc. Then, after they have completed this first section of the Google form, we ask them to do the written task. Right. At the moment, we are collecting for the L1 Spanish, L2 English component. We're collecting data on the film. And then, when they have completed the written task, they have to do a placement. And then, at the end of the Google form, they can see the results. They can see the level they have according to the text, which is the Oxford Quick Placement Test for COREFL. Then, after at least 15 days, we ask the participant that has completed the Google form to do the oral task. And we do this at least 15 days after they completed the written task, because we ask them to complete exactly the same task, but now using their speaking. As I said before, we started collecting data on site from our faculty, but then, with COVID, we decided that why not try collecting data online, and we're now also collecting data online. So the novelty of this is that we have the exact same participant producing data in the written mode and in the spoken mode. So all the other variables are kept constant, since it is the same participant, and the task is exactly the same. And we can only have then just one variable, which is mode of production. This is a summary of the data collection. So we ask them to complete the form. This is the form they complete, and then the data that is collected from using Google Forms is downloaded on an Excel spreadsheet. All the information is here. Then, after at least 15 days, and we wait 15 days, at least 15 days, so there is no bias in the oral task from the part of the participant. We ask them to produce to do the same task, but in spoken language this time. Then we process all the data. We clean all the data in our database, as you can see now, they're different colors, right? And we prepare the data so that it can be sent to our computational linguist, and it can be put online. And now I'm going to say a few words about the interface. Okay, there it is. So the interface can be accessed from learnercorpora.com, which is our domain. Learner Corpora is our matrix website. So here there are instructions in English and also in Spanish for any participant that wants to contribute with data. As you can see, there are options for all the different language components. So if, for example, we click on, okay, let's look at COREFL. L1 Czech, L2 English, then you'll be able to see the Google form that the learners in this component have to fill in when contributing data to COREFL. there is some description of the corpus. Then they also have to give their consent, and there's some data protection information. And then this is in the first section, which is, which collects data about their profile. And then they can move on, right, until they do the written task, and they also do the proficiency test. Right, so what I was saying is that, let me go back. All the different Google Forms can be accessed from, oops, let me see if I can go backwards. No, okay, maybe I can. Yes, yeah. So the different Google Forms can be accessed from this domain, learnercorpora.com, right? And then the different corpora can be accessed from here as well. So this is what you have to click to use COREFL. Now we wanted to make this interface as well documented as possible. We wanted to give as much information as possible for the user. So first of all, you'll find information, very general information about the corpus. Then there's a user guide, so there will be information. You'll find here information about how to use the interface. And there's also plenty of documentation about corpus design, because this is also crucial for the user. So it is important to know what kind of information is documented, is stored, can be used for the searchers. Right, so here we'll have the different tasks, and here we'll have the different variables. So the learner-related variables, the task variables, etc. A proficiency level, the different information about the proficiency level that there is in the corpus, the different how score is obtained from the information they provide about their proficiency level. And there's also information about how the data is collected, even the type of device that we use to record the data, right? Then there's also information about the metadata that comes with each corpus text. So this will be the header of a text. So there's plenty of information about the learner and about the task. And then the text is here. The text can be downloaded with the metadata or without the metadata if you don't want the metadata to interfere with your concordance in your concordance lines. So yes, so there's the option of downloading the text without the metadata. And then of course, all the metadata is explained later on. Then there's also an account of the transcription conventions that we've used for the oral component. There are no so many marks. There's no so many aspects that are being tagged. But this is because the aspect, the linguistic aspect we're interested in is enough for resolution. So we're not interested in phonology, and this is why only the basic features of a spoken language have been marked. So pauses, field pauses, non-language sounds, false starts, repetitions, rewordings, reformulations, capitalization, etc. Okay. And then there's also an account of attacks. Now the data is POS tagged, but it has not been revised. The tagging has not been revised, which we would like to do in the near future. We've noticed that there are some problems. Right, so revision is necessary. But in general terms, this is an addition to the corpus that we thought would be a good idea to have, and yes, so there is here an account of the tags and the POS tagging. In statistics, there's information about about the corpus holdings, the different figures, and there are also figures for, for in terms of text, mode of production or medium, L1, etc. If you're interested, sorry, and then there's also information, site information. There's information also about the team. As you can see, Cristobal Lozano is the main responsible for this corpus, and then there's myself and Marcus Callis in charge of the German component, which is, by the way, these are the only two L2 components that are online. But of course, we're hoping to put them to put the others online at the end of the current project. And now, search. You can select, as you've seen just now, simple search and advanced search. And if you use simple search and you don't type in any words, you can download the whole corpus. You would have to select whether you would like to download an L2 component or the native component. So see, for example, that we select here the Spanish component, and then we click on search. Then we'll get all the texts, which we can download, right? I would like to show you how a text looks like. So this is what you can visualize online. So there's a few metadata here, and then there's a text. I would like to show you a spoken text so that you can, oh, sorry, let's see. I think I lost it. Okay, there's a spoken text here. So, so for the visualization of this text, what you have is the transcription of the spoken text, and then you can also hear the spoken text. I hope you can hear it. And again, you have some metadata here, and you can, if you're interested in just one text, you can download the text. You can download text only, text with metadata, and also the audio file. So this is how you would download the corpus data, all the corpus data, or one text only. And then if you select advanced search from the menu, you will be able to narrow down your search a little bit more. So you will be able to select the L2 component, right? Say, for example, German, and then you will be able to narrow down the search, as I was saying, using other features, like, for example, written and spoken by the same person. You can also search by task title if you're interested in text produced on a particular task. Also, you can search by file name, and then you can narrow down the search even more, by using other features like sex, age, and other measures of proficiency. Age of exposure, you studying English at university or stay abroad months are also possible. You can have concordance lines, and you can search words, and you can also search grammatical elements. You can search by lemmas if you want, and you can, of course, use POS tags. Okay? Though, as I say, I will be, I will be happier if this is revised, but we're hoping to be able to revise to clean the data pretty soon. Okay. Right. So this was a very brief account of the interface and of the corpus, right? I mean, if you have any questions about the corpus, I mean, you can ask the questions later on, and then also you can get in touch with me by email if you're interested. If you have any queries about the interface, about the corpus, and the idea is to disseminate the corpus as much as possible, and to share what we've done, all the work we've done, and that is now online with as many researchers as possible. And now I'm going to turn to the second part of the talk. I'm going to talk about a referring expression selection in L1 Spanish, L2 English. This is a study that I'm conducting along with a PhD of mine, Maika Espinola Rosillo. Now, what about referring expressions? What are we interested in? Well, when we talk about, when we tell a story, the narrative, we refer to different characters, and we can refer back to them by using different referring expressions. We can use zero, we can use unstressed pronouns, we can use different types of noun phrases. This is just a summary of the different referring expressions that you can use. And as you can see, well, they range from less full forms up to fuller forms. I brought an example of them of three of the referring expressions in these examples, which comes from the corpus. The example reads, he continues to try and pass the baby along to others during his talk. So he refers back to Chaplin, which has been mentioned in full as a noun phrase previously. Then the speaker or the narrator refers to the policeman. The policeman sees what he's doing, and he refers back to Chaplin and keeps a close eye on him. And zero is used in this context, referring back to the policeman. So as you can see, these three options are possible in English. Now, the selection of referring expression is constrained by a number of factors. There are language-specific aspects that constrain referring expression selection. For example, one of them is the difference between null subject languages and non-null subject languages. So Spanish is a null subject language because zero pronoun zero can be used in subject position, and it's actually a very common choice in Spanish. But this is not possible in English, except for certain contexts, like for example the one we've seen before, which is coordination. There are other discourse aspects that constrain this selection of referring expressions. This is summarized by Givon with a very general principle. He says that the more disruptive, surprising, discontinuous, or hard to process a topic is, the more coding material must be assigned to it. So there are disruptive factors, for example, the information status of topicality. So when the topic is changed, topic is usually associated with subjects, grammatical subjects. So when the topic is changed, a fuller form is required. Whereas if there is topic continuity, which will be the case in this context, in this subject, which refers back to the police, a less full form will be required. In this case, zero will be expected. In this case, zero. Now, unity is another aspect that determines referring expression selection. So breaking the thematic unity involves a degree of disruptiveness, and then decreases the accessibility of the reference, and therefore requires fuller form. So for example, in written language, a paragraph break will be a thematic, breaking the thematic unity, and right after that, a fuller form will be required, even if there is maintenance of reference to the same participants that had just been mentioned before the paragraph break. Sorry, oops. Okay. Right. Distance is another factor that has an impact on the selection of referring expressions. So the more distance the antecedent referent is, the fuller the form that is expected, and also the number of competing antecedents. The higher the number of competing antecedents, the potential antecedents, the fuller the anaphor expected. Now, other aspect are syntactic in nature. So there are structures, as we've seen before, that allow specific referring expressions like coordination in English, where 0 is allowed. There are also some antecedent syntactic roles. For example, the subject position, which is more salient than other syntactic roles, for example, the object, and then require less full forms. And also it's been mentioned that there are syntactic structures which are less salient, for example, subordinate clauses, and therefore require fuller forms. There are also cognitive aspects involved. As Arnold mentions, the higher the processing load, which may have to do with the attentional load, planning load, spoken disfluencies, memory as well, the fuller the referring expression selected. Now, what is the picture in second language acquisition? Referring expression selection in reference maintenance, specifically in this discourse context, when reference is maintained to the same antecedent co-referent, is particularly problematic for L2 learners, and in our case, for our purposes, for L2 English learners. And this is irrespective of the learner's L1. So what do? What they do is that they select fuller forms than those that are selected by native speakers. And this also happens sometimes even at advanced levels of competence. A number of explanations or accounts have been given to explain this behavior. Psycholinguistics accounts explain this behavior as a strategy to deal with much higher cognitive load in language learners during language production. And they also say that there's high complexity when integrating aspects of discourse and syntax at the same time, which are the aspects that are involved in an alpha resolution. Pragmatic accounts of this language behavior explain that the promotion of transparent form-function relationships, that is the selection of more iconic forms, increase clarity and therefore reduce any possible ambiguity. So learners prefer to select more iconic forms because they want to make sure that they are clear, that they are going to be understood, and they're going to be less ambiguous in their discourse. Now, in this paper, in this study, I'm going to present, going to focus on third-person singular grammatical subjects in L1 Spanish, L2 English. I'm going to focus on a particular discourse syntactic context, reference maintenance, and coordination. And I'm going to look at written performance and spoken performance to ultimately explore the effect of mode in referring expression selection. Reference maintenance coordination is a context which favors maximal discourse coherence in English, and also the selection of the least marked form, zero anaphors. The example illustrates the context we've seen before. So what about referring expression selection in coordination context? This has been explored not very often, but we can talk about two studies where this context has been specifically tackled. One of them explores L1 French, L2 English spoken narratives, and Leclerc and Lenard, they don't make a difference between reference maintenance or reference shift. So the figures they give is within the overall picture of context they look at. So they report very low use of zero anaphors, only 5% in their intermediate and advanced participants, while native use a higher amount of zeros, 20%. Recently, Quesada and Lozano, which are from our research team, explore L1 Spanish, L2 English written narratives. They focused on reference maintenance coordination, and they again reported a very high number of zeros used in this context, almost 90% of the cases, while learners use much fewer zeros in this particular discourse syntactic context. Advanced learners not going over 60%. And this is interesting because this is the case, even the learners have the possibility of using zero in subject position because Spanish is a null subject language, but they don't seem to be transferring their zeros in their mother tongue to English in this particular discourse syntactic context. So they are over explicit, we can say, in comparison to native speakers of English. So in these two studies, coordination was not exhaustively explored. It was only explored by passing because it was analyzed alongside other aspects of reference. And L1 Spanish, L2 English was only explored in written performance, but not in spoken performance. Now I'm going to say a few words about mode of production. The difference between written and spoken modes lies or is determined by two main factors, time and permanence of record. Now, in relation to time, what we can say is that time pressure is much higher for the speaker than for the writer. And this is so because the speaker seems to be under pressure for continuous output. There's another aspect that characterizes the speaker and in the spoken language, and is the fact that editing and monitoring is less available than for the writer. And another factor or another constraint is a limitation is that speakers have less access to long-term memory because of time pressure and time restrictions, unlike the writers. In terms of permanence of record, speaking, of course, is not permanent and writing is, and speaking has been associated with higher degrees of tolerance and to lower degrees of accuracy. So the permanent writer of writing is however associated with demands for higher precision in language, and this has been shown as well. So we can then, in terms of the differences between speaking and writing, we can see that there are certain similarities between speaking and online performance, online experiments, and writing and offline performance. A number of studies in other linguistics areas unrelated to a reference conducted on L1 Spanish, L2 English, and they report that mode does not have an effect on, does have an effect on language performance and acquisition. So L2 writers, because of the reasons I've just explained, seem to show higher degrees of accuracy than L2 speakers. Now, in relation to reference, we find studies which have looked at native data and L1 acquisition. In some cases, they have found that for native language, mode does not have an effect. And this is the case of most of the studies for L1 Spanish, L1 Vietnamese, and L1 Catalan acquisition. But for L1 Japanese, Christensen found that mode does have an effect in referring expression selection. For L2 English, corpus-based studies either focus on spoken language or written language. We don't have any studies, as far as we know, that contrast these two modes of production. Now, what are our research questions? I'm going to focus on two research questions. In the first research question, which reads, is there a mode effect in reference, maintenance, coordination of learners and native speakers discourse? What we want to look at is at the general background. We want to see what the syntactic and discourse configuration of our participants' text is and whether there is any possible mode effects. I'm also going to look at proficiency level effects. And in the second research question, we'll be looking at any mode effects in the selection of referring expressions in the particular context I've selected, reference, maintenance, coordination. For this, I'm using data from the corpus and using written and spoken tests by the same participants across 3 different proficiency levels. So I've selected data from lower intermediate, lower advanced, and the native group. 3 participants represent each of the groups. The learners are English studies university students. They may be also doing translation. And the native speakers are also university students. They're international students in Granada. And the ages are very similar. All in all, we've explored 60 texts comprising 18,694 words, and so 16 texts were analyzed, 30 texts per batch across 3 levels and in written and spoken mode. The task represented in the test is the story retailed based on the film, a video clip of the film The Kid, which I've mentioned before. And for data analysis, I've used the UN Corpus tool, which is an annotation tool, which also can be used to conduct statistical analysis, chi-square mostly. All in all, almost 1,500 grammatical subjects were analyzed. These are the categories of analysis. So first of all, I identify the form of the anaphor, and then I describe the discourse context. This will be a reference, continued reference. Then I also wanted to see whether there is any intervening subordination, any intervening clauses. I'm only analyzing main clauses, but I want to see whether there is any effect of intervening subordinate clauses, and also the effect of the referentiality of the subject in the subordinate clauses. And I also want to look at distance, how far the anaphor is from the antecedent referent. And then for the syntactic configuration, I'm looking at the difference between main and coordinate clauses, how long the chains are, and the type of coordinators that are used. And these are the results. The results for this first question, where I'm looking at the discourse syntactic configuration of a participant's tests, are this. First of all, in the first figure, what we can see is a representation of the different discourse contexts. What we can see is that for all the 3 levels and for the written and spoken modes, reference maintenance is the discourse configuration that is largely preferred in all the batches. There's no mode effect here for the natives. There is mode effect for the advanced learners, right here. But the conclusion that I take from this slide is that despite the statistically significant differences, which I'm marking here with 3 asterisks, if the difference is if there are highly significant differences, is that in all the cases, over 50% of the choices are of reference maintenance. Now, in the second figure, we have a representation of coordination, the difference between coordinate and non-coordinate clauses. Now, here, what we can see is that coordination abounds here in this batch, in the spoken native batch. And there are statistically significant differences across modes. But this difference is absent in the learner texts, in the spoken texts. Right. There are differences across proficiency levels between the learners and the native speakers persistently in the spoken mode, because as we can see, the native speakers use much more coordination, or more coordination we can see in the spoken text compared to the written texts. In figure 3, I'm looking at the function of coordination. So only look at coordination context, and I'm looking at the different discourse functions of coordinate clauses. And the interesting thing here is that, as you can see from the percentages in all the batches, irrespective, regardless the mode of production, coordination is used for reference maintenance. So we can agree, we can see that, as expected from the literature, reference maintenance is widely used in narratives, and coordination is a syntactic mechanism that is used to maintain the reference. And so learners seem to be aware of this. Now, in terms of the length, or how long, how many they are in our learners' texts, what we can see is that 2 clause chains of coordinate clauses are the tendency. Okay, so in all cases, over 50% of the choices are of 2 coordinate clauses. And interestingly, we can see that there are longer chains here, which are typical of L1 spoken English. And this is different from all the batches, except for the intermediate written texts. So we can see that maybe there are some traits of spoken language, of conversational language in this batch. in terms of a coordinator that is used, and is by far the coordinator that is used by all the groups, except for the spoken component here of the natives. Okay, well, no coordinator is higher than in all the batches, and this seems to be coherent with the fact that they use longer chains of coordinate clauses. So no coordinator is expected also from here. But what is interesting is that this doesn't happen in the other batch, where longer chains of coordination were also present. So it may be the case that native speakers use juxtaposition more than the learners, specifically in the spoken language. In the next figure, in figure 6, I'm looking at the presence of intervening subordinate clauses. Now, as we can see from the figures, absence of intervening subordination between the subjects of the coordinate clauses always is present throughout all the batches. And there are no statistically significant differences between mode of production or cross proficiency levels. So when they use coordination, usually there is no subordinate clauses in between. Now, when there is intervening subordination, usually there is just one subordinate clause. So there is very little disruption, syntactic disruption in this sense, as we can see. We can see in figure 7. And then in figure 6, what we have is a result for referentiality. So when there is intervening subordination, the subject of this subordinate clause, is it correferential with the anaphor, with the subject in the main clause, in the coordinate clauses that we're looking at? Well, interestingly, and the subject of the learner subordinate clauses tend to be correferential with the subjects of the coordinate clause, especially in spoken discourse, as we can see here, right, in the graphs, in this graph. But in contrast, intervening subordinate clauses are not necessarily co-referential with coordinate clauses in L1 English, regardless of mode of production. However, the frequencies are very low at this point, because remember that intervening subordination is not very frequent in our text. So we are dealing with very low frequencies. So, and this is probably where we'll see statistically significant differences. But we can see that they are, in terms of percentages only, at least it seems to be some differences in the learned spoken language. So one conclusion we can see, or one comment I can make here, is that well, the learner's discourse seems to be more coherent. So reference is maintained not just in the coordinate clauses, but also across any subordination, because the subject in the subordinate clauses are co-referential with the subjects of the coordinate clauses. But this doesn't seem to be a factor in native language. Now, as to the second question, what I'm looking at referring expression selection. In this figure, in figure 9, what we can see is a representation of the 3 different anaphors, that's in different grammatical forms. And what we can see, if we look at the intermediate and advanced groups, is that there is an effect of mode in L2 English when it comes to referring expression selection, right? There are statistically significant differences for 0 and for pronoun, as we can see when we compare written and spoken language. So in spoken language, pronouns seems to be higher, okay? Is pretty much the opposite in the intermediate if we compare written spoken language. We can see that there is some development in the advanced group. So pronouns now are lower in the advanced spoken language, and zeros are higher, right? Even though they're not as high as in the written mode. So there is development, but there is still mode differences. And in the native component, as we can see, and there are no statistically significant differences across mode of production, 0 is by far the anaphoric form that is selected in coordinate contexts. The picture that I just described is the same in contexts where there is no intervening subordinate clauses. Okay, so it's pretty much the same statistical results apply. And then in figure 11, what we can see is that when there is any intervening subordinate clause, right, the tendency towards zero is still present in written and spoken L1 English, right? Pronouns are higher than before, but they still tend to select zeros. There are no statistically significant differences across mode of production, so there's no mode effect here either. And then if we looked at the learners, what we can see is that pronouns are higher in the spoken language, okay? And they're even higher than when there was no intervening subordination. So it is exactly the opposite what we find here. So intervening subordination seems to be very disruptive for learners, and they then tend to select fuller forms than before, and of course fuller forms than the natives. And then finally, this is the last figure, what I'm showing the results from reference maintenance coordination with non-coreferential intervening subordinate clauses. What we can see is that when the subordinate clause is non-coreferential with the subject of the subject in the subordinate clause is not coreferential with the subject in the coordinate clauses, native speakers still select zeros, even though pronouns are higher, especially in the spoken component. In learners, we see the same picture, especially in the spoken component. What we can see is that they tend to select pronouns far more than zeros. The written component, I forgot to mention this before, but I would like to stress it now, especially in the case of advanced learners. In the written component, there do not seem to be differences between them and the native speakers. So the main difference is in the spoken discourse. And now I'm going to turn to the conclusions. I know that I'm a bit late, but I'm finishing off. So in the first research question, which look at possible mode effects on reference maintenance coordination, what we can see is that it seems that L1 Spanish L2 learners are aware of the suitability of this discourse syntactic configuration for narratives, both in the written and spoken narratives. Mode does not have an effect here. In terms of the syntactic configuration of our participant tests, there are a number of similarities. The main function of coordination is to maintain the reference, and so learners are aware of this as well. The chain of coordinate clauses are largely conjoined by and. Subordination does not tend to occur within coordinate clauses. This is the same for all the different batches. And when there is intervening subordination, the tendency is just for one intervening clause to occur. Now, the differences here are, for example, in that, as I mentioned before, coordination abounds in spoken native English, okay? And there are mode effects here, but learners do not seem to be aware of that. Native speakers use longer chains of coordinate clauses, and that's why this is what explain the fact that there is a higher incidence of no overt coordinator in spoken native English. Then finally, when there is intervening subordination in spoken L2 English, the grammatical subject of subordinate clauses tend to be co-referential with the subject of coordinate clauses, while, as we've seen before, in native language, this co-referentiality, co-referentiality is not necessarily the case. Now, the frequencies are very low at this point, and there are no statistically significant differences, but it will be interesting to explore a larger database, because if learners' spoken production is actually more coherent in this respect, this could be explained as a discourse strategy to be more effectively to articulate discourse more effectively. So they tend to maintain the reference, so they don't risk switching the reference in the subordinate clause. They are more conservative, so they prefer to maintain the reference across subordinate clauses as well. So, just as the format selected, so that there, in order to avoid ambiguity, maybe this would be another strategy, syntactic in this case, in our learners. As to the second research question, we have seen that in native language, in reference maintenance coordination, there's a marked preference for zero anaphorms. And this preference is both in the written and spoken discourse, so we can conclude that there is no effect of mode in the production of referring expressions. There are no studies for L1 English, so I think that this could be a very interesting finding. This will be a very important finding from this study, even if the focus is second language acquisition. But since we have native data as well, it could be a contribution to native data too. Now, we've also seen that intervening subordination, has an effect on referring expression selection. In native data, zero anaphors are still preferred over pronouns, even though pronouns go up a little bit, and zeros go down a little bit as well. Now, lack of co-referentiality in the intervening subordinate clause also have an effect, but overall, the preference towards zero anaphors over forms is still there. Now, this is very interesting because the finding then confirmed that the subject reference in subordinate clauses are less topical, are less salient, and actually do not switch the reference. This is something that was mentioned by Gundel and was only hinted at Lozano, but which seems to be confirmed in this study, given that co-referentiality is not necessarily the case in the native speaker subordinate clauses. Of course, we will need a larger database in order to confirm these results, because as I mentioned, the frequencies are low at this point. Now, in terms of the learners referring expression selection, we can see that mode does have an effect on referring expression selection. Learners are more often explicit in the spoken discourse than in the written discourse. In the written discourse, there is a preference towards zero anaphors from intermediate level upwards. They reach native-like behavior at advanced level, and this contrasts with the study on the written language by Quesada and Lozano. Probably the differences are explainable in terms of the fact that they use a different task. And we can also see in the written mode that if disruption increases, the amount of fuller forms, that is pronouns, substantially increases in both groups. Now, in the spoken mode, we can also see the developmental trend that I described for the learners' written language. But they are more over explicit in this type of discourse, even at advanced levels of English, but they do not show native-like behavior as opposed to the results from the written mode. We can see here that if disruption increases, over explicitness becomes even more marked than in the written discourse. So finally, what I can say is that learners referring expressions are proven to be fuller, expected from the literature, than those by native speakers, but this is especially the case in their spoken production. And the referring expressions continue to be more marked, more iconic as levels of disruption increase. In L1 English, the amount of lighter forms decreases as level of disruption increase, but interestingly, zero is still the preferred referring expression, unlike in learner texts. It will be necessary to explore whether the effect of intervening subordination and co-referentiality are alike, whether they have the same impact or not. This is something that could be done in the future. And then another major comment that I would like to make is that mode has no effect on L1 English referring expression selection, but it does in learner language. And the effect is pervasive in both language levels and whenever the disruptive syntactic factors apply. This is the case of reference maintenance coordination. It may be the case of other syntactic content, but we'll need to explore them. An explanation of this is that the hard-pressed conditions of speaking apply here and seem to add a degree of complexity in the performance as to referring expression selection. It is true that for L2 referring expression selection, memory is very important. And why so? Because they have to take into consideration a number of factors, a large number of factors actually, and of very linguistic nature. And they should be recalled and evaluated from the preceding context in order to select the most appropriate referring expression. Right. In writing, given the less taxing time conditions of the mode, this linguistic aspect that rule the anaphors can be more carefully considered, and then the selection of the anaphor can be verified during modulation. So what we can conclude is that higher cognitive load interferes in the expression of referring expressions in intermediate and advanced spoken L2 English. But still, since there are no differences in advanced written English, the suggestion is that referring expression selection is acquired by this level, by advanced learners of English. It's just that there is interference in the cognitive load, in the cognitive processing, and it's just that is preventing the appropriate performance of the learners in the spoken mode. And now a more general question arises, probably too general for this talk, but the general question is, which mode represents second language acquisition more accurately? Is it written mode or is spoken mode? Traditionally, spoken mode has been taken as the best mode, the best type of performance to represent learners' interlanguage knowledge. But it seems that in some aspects of language like this one, it may be actually interfering, and the written mode, one may wonder, maybe a better format of the language in order to explore or for interlanguage to be manifested. And with this, I think I finished my presentation. Thank you so much, and I'm very sorry I'm over the time limit.
No, thank you very much for your presentation.